This week on Cloud S.L.A.W, we're going to get hacked. You've all been more than patient as I've dragged you along on this security journey. Yes, I try to keep things as interesting as possible and provide context, but sometimes you just need to jump off a bridge to prove a point. By jumping off a bridge, I mean bungee jumping to get over your fear of heights or like a really short bridge. Securus LLC and Cloud S.L.A.W do not recommend jumping off bridges, and we take no responsibility for your personal decisions. In today's lab, we're going to deploy a nice juicy target onto the internet, and then we'll see if any of the sharks bite. Here's the deal. This week's CloudFormation template is going to deploy an EC2 instance on a public subnet with port 22, which if you recall is SSH, open to the internet. The instance won't have any SSH keys provisioned on it, and it won't have an IAM role, an instance profile. And without that SSH key or the username and password, there's no way for an attacker to actually brute force their way in. Without an IAM role and with nothing else on that subnet, even if the attacker does find some unknown vulnerability and compromises the instance, they can't harm anything else. They won't be able to make any AWS API calls because there's no instance profile, no role that's assigned, and there's nothing else on the network to attack. Our instance will also be on the free tier. And our VPC will only have an internet gateway, which is free. It won't have a NAT gateway or any VPC endpoints. Now, you will be charged a nominal amount for the IP address. Amazon charges for IPv4 addresses these days, but I did the math and it would only be like $3.60 if you leave it running for the entire month. We're going to set this up and then we're going to let it run. And if it goes well, some adversary on the internet is going to try to exploit it. Now, depending on how they attack, guard duty will hopefully trigger and you'll get an email alert. And look, there's definitely going to be a lot of attacks, but they're not always necessarily going to be able to trigger guard duty. Is this a guarantee? Nope. I absolutely guarantee any server with port 22 exposed on the internet is attacked, but guard duty is picky about like what it actually decides to trigger on, particularly when it's an external attack like this. I built an attack simulator for my incident response training, and even though it includes SSH brute force, it rarely actually is able to get guard duty to trigger. But we're going to be exposed to a much wider range of attacks, and my hope is that the bad folks on the internet will be a little more aggressive and a little more determined than my little classroom tool. Let's take a minute and talk about why this works. Things being exposed to the internet is one of the top 2 ways cloud gets compromised. Attackers are continuously scanning for exposed servers, especially for SSH and especially in the IP address space of the cloud providers, including AWS. GuardDuty has built-in detectors for some of these attacks, including this brute force, or when people try to brute force SSH. And in our organization, we configured 3 things that result in us seeing an email for GuardDuty findings in any region of any account in our organization. So a little bit of review about stuff that we've already done, and what we're doing is we're testing to see if our security controls were set up and are working properly. When we set up GuardDuty with delegated administration, we set it up to automatically deploy in all accounts in all active regions. And thanks to our service control policy, that's limited to Oregon and Virginia in our accounts. Security Hub is also set up with delegated administration, and we configured it to collect the alerts, the findings from all the other AWS security tools as those are turned on, including GuardDuty. We then set up an event bridge rule to email us any Security Hub findings. And anywhere in our organization, if anything, GuardDuty, Access Analyzer, any of those tools triggers, that feeds into Security Hub. Those findings in Security Hub will get emailed out to us thanks to that event bridge rule that we set up. This is what we've been building towards, people, a default secure organization with protection spanning all of our accounts and all of our regions, no matter what we deploy. And this will hopefully show you why Session Manager is a better choice than SSH. Look, there is no guarantee this will work. We can't control the attackers. We can't control what GuardDuty is going to trigger on. In my experiences, the odds are pretty good if you leave it running for a few days or a few weeks that some attacker is going to go ahead and trigger it. So a few key points that I want you to really burn into your brain. 1, if you make things public on the internet, someone's going to attack them. And 2, setting up automated guardrails, including detective controls and alerts, will reduce your security exposure. All right, you ready? Let's go jump off that bridge. This is going to be our fastest lab yet in terms of what you do in the console, but it's pretty cool, especially if you're going to get those email alerts. All we're going to do is deploy a CloudFormation template that sets up our exposure, and then we wait for an attacker to do something with it. Okay, let's go ahead and sign into our admin portal or sign in portal. Then go to test account 1 and administrator access. We want to go over to CloudFormation so we can launch everything. Click create stack, and the URL is in the blog post, but it is the one that ends in lab36.template. Click next. For the stack details, we want to give it a name that's going to remind us what this one is. So we're going to call it exposed. Because if you do leave it for a month, we're going to have other labs and other templates up and running. This way you know which one is which. Scroll all the way down, click next. Scroll all the way down, click submit. Notice there's no little blue box because we're not creating any IAM roles. We're not going to be logging into this. And this will take about 3 minutes to deploy, so I will go ahead and pause the video. Heck, for me, that took less than 3 minutes and everything is deployed. But let's go check it out and make sure it's configured properly. And to do that, we will go to EC2 and make sure that our exposures are all set up. Go to instances, and we have the one instance, and it's called Hack Me Please, just to make sure we don't forget. If you click on the checkbox there, first thing we need to do is make sure it has a public IP address, and it does have a public IP address. Next thing we want to do is check the security on that security group, and port 22 is exposed to the entire internet. And we also have, of course, our egress, our outbound rule. That's all you need to do. Now, this assumes that you have gone through and set up in all of our other labs that you have GuardDuty running and Security Hub and your Event Bridge rule. In this case, I can confirm a little bit of that by just going to GuardDuty. Helps to spell GuardDuty correctly. And make sure that it's deployed in this region in this account, and you can see that we have no findings. We're not going to go through the rest of the setup because that involved 3 or 4 different labs that we already went through. Now, if you find anything interesting, drop me an email. I'd love to hear about it. And it might take a couple of days, might even take a couple of weeks. At most, you're going to spend $3.60 to leave this running a month. It's your choice how you want to handle it. That's all we've got. We'll come back to this and have a great week.